to the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John Tulac.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Professionals of the Inland Empire, which we affectionately call PI. I'm John Tulac, international business attorney located in Claremont, California. I'm the host for this ongoing podcast where we feature top professionals at the peak of their powers practicing in the Inland Empire, serving the greater Inland Empire business community. That is our intended audience, and the purpose of this is to showcase our talent in the Inland Empire and also call attention to the various ways and means by which service professionals and their clients enhance economic development in our region. So today I'm really happy to invite to the podcast and have on as our guest Genene Dunn, who is an estate planning attorney, and Jacob Averett, who's a professional fiduciary. So there's a little bit of some things that they can talk about that's going to overlap and some things that are special to their areas of practice. So Genene and Jacob, welcome to Professionals of the Inland Empire. And ladies and gentlemen, sit back for a half hour and enjoy a slice of pie. Here we go. Genene, let's start with you. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So yeah, as mentioned, I am an estate planning attorney. We're a full service trust and estates firm. So all we do is trust and estates. And we are about a third estate planning, a third probate, and a third trust administration. So the estate planning is the setup where we're creating the documents, trusts, wills, powers of attorney, all those kinds of things, making sure the assets are properly in those documents. And then we also do the trust administration, which is when people pass away. And if they have a trust and their assets are in the trust, then we guide the trustee and the family through the trust administration process that's required when the person who created the trust passes away. And then we do also handle probate. So probate is when people don't have a trust and they pass away with assets in their individual name. And those assets have to go through the court system to be able to pass to their heirs or beneficiaries, depending upon the circumstance. So that is when it has to go through the court system. We do also handle that. And in those areas, we do litigate those things. So what that means is that we do fight over those things when that comes up. So if we have family members fighting or we're contesting any trusts or wills, we also do represent people going through those different processes. And that's what we do. All trust and estates, we don't do anything else. We also do conservatorships. So when people are incapacitated but are still living and maybe we need a court process to take over things for them, or again, we have people fighting about things, we handle that as well. So anything that has to do with the probate court is primarily what we do day to day.
Okay. And of course, the whole idea is to avoid probate, right? Because that's expensive and time consuming. And especially if it's something that's being fought over, the outcome is uncertain, right? We don't like that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's primarily the purpose of the estate planning, is to usually set up the trust, make sure that assets are properly in the trust so that there is no probate court process required for assets when they pass away. So yes, that is the primary function of doing the estate planning a lot of the time, to avoid that expensive probate court process.
Exactly. And you can end up in probate even if you have a will, right? But you don't have a trust. So, it's one thing if you're married and it just goes automatically to your spouse, but if the spouse only stays with a will, then there's going to be a probate at the passing of the second spouse, if I understand this correctly, right? And that's something we generally want to avoid unless it's a very small estate that could avoid probate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. If you have just a will most of the time with no trust, and if you assets are high enough value, with no beneficiaries, no joint owners, then yes, that is going to trigger probate as well.
So what are the dollar limits that people need to be concerned about where they really need to be thinking about having a trust? And it's worth the time and expense to do that estate planning with someone who's an expert in it like yourself.
I mean, for the trust, I will say for most of our clients, what usually triggers the need for a trust is real estate, because there are other things you can do with accounts. You can have joint owners on accounts, pay on death beneficiaries very easily on accounts. So usually the real estate is what people don't want to mess with their ownership. They don't want to trigger any reassessment of property taxes. So very often that is what triggers the need for a trust in California. I tell everybody if you have real estate worth $55,000 or more, it's going to have some kind of probate to it. There's different avenues of probate that can come up, and that has changed in the law recently. But if with real estate of 55,000 or more, there's going to be something that needs to get filed with the court if we don't have that in a trust typically.
That's a pretty low ceiling. That's like a nice doghouse in Claremont, maybe a hen
Yeah.
house.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so all you people who are homeowners, you have been properly warned.
Yeah. And then, I mean, besides that, I usually say 185,000. So if we have an account, again, with no joint owner, no beneficiary on it, not in the trust, if that value is over 185,000, that's also what would subject it to probate as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So Jacob, let's turn our attention to you now. Let's
Yes.
hear from you. Tell us who you are, what you do, and how you do it.
Absolutely, John. I appreciate you having me on here. So I'm a California licensed professional fiduciary, and I deal with a lot of the similar things that Genene was talking about. I don't know what you mean about families fighting, though. I've not seen that yet. Uh, no, but so everything that she was talking about in terms of the trust administration, conservatorships, and stuff like that. Normally, in a lot of cases, these law firms work with family members in this. And a lot of times family members aren't able to handle these sorts of things. Sometimes, the attorneys will see it beforehand and direct them to somebody like me. Sometimes, it's out of everybody's control. But what I do is I professionally administer these things. I'm licensed by the state to do so. Um, so I know all of the ins and outs of the process a little bit better than most of your average people. Another way that helps is, again, in conservatorships, probates. A lot of times there's bonds needed in that type of administration because if something goes wrong, the bond is what covers the actual the estate in that matter. A lot of normal people who don't have any sort of licensing, anything like that, they can only be bonded for very small amounts. So a lot of times the courts won't even like somebody like that to administer it just because there's a lot of risk to it. So having somebody like me brought in makes it so there could be a proper bond on this sort of thing. And yeah, we deal in pretty much all wakes of the estate planning world. We get our cases from there's a couple different ways that we get our cases. The way that we like that it's done is when someone is planning ahead of time and they go to somebody like Genene. They say, I have these different assets. I know how I want this to go. Um, and they do a proper estate plan, and maybe it's recognized ahead of time that the person, maybe their daughter or son or whoever they think can do it. Maybe the attorney notices ahead of time there's going to be some conflict, and they say, hey, how about you just meet with a professional fiduciary, see if it's something that, they might be able to help you with. And so they come to me ahead of time, we click, they decide that that's what they want to do, and everything is set up ahead of time. That's the most beautiful way to do it. So that way we have a copy of the documents. When something happens with them, we can step right in. There's no delay. We already know what we're supposed to be doing. That's the best way for it to happen. Doesn't always happen that way.
Right. And I was seeing if you have a significant enough size estate, it might be well worth it to have it planned to be administered by a professional fiduciary.
Yes.
So that the family members aren't bothered by it.
Oh, yeah.
And also, frankly, a lot of people who may inherit under a trust have zero skills whatsoever
Yes.
in terms of how to deal with the assets
Yep.
in the estate, right?
Yep. And alongside that, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that just because you're a non-professional does not mean that you're not held to the same fiduciary standard that us as professionals are. So, everything that can go wrong in this world of administration, it can go wrong with us. But the difference is we have the training, we have the licensing behind us, so we know generally what to look out for so things don't go wrong. Your
So you
average
both have
person
this,
doesn't.
Yeah, so you both have the same fiduciary standard, don't you, in terms
Exactly.
of trust administration?
Yep.
And a fiduciary is licensed, but doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer. But the fiduciary
Yes.
standard by which you conduct trust administration affairs is identical. Uh, so,
Yes.
okay, so Genene, tell us a little bit more about the fiduciary standard, how that is indeed an elevated standard of care that anyone who is in this role has to follow.
I think that the basic principle that people forget about, because Jacob's absolutely right. We see a lot of the times where family members are in this role and they're doing things and they kind of forget that they're handling somebody else's money.
Mhm.
And that's the number one thing that we see is that kids will be helping mom and dad and taking care of mom and dad, and they don't really track anything. They don't remember what any of the expenses were. And then we get another family member asking what happened over the last year, and they can't answer for that. And that's the number one situation that we see come up where with the fiduciary, that fiduciary is never going to say, I don't remember, I don't know. A fiduciary is going to know what can and cannot be spent on, what is a proper expenditure, what's not, and most importantly, have record of what those expenditures were. That's, I think, the main thing, remembering that you're handling somebody else's money, because that does get lost when you're caring for a family member.
Mhm.
People do think, oh, I'm just doing this because I need to care for my mom or dad. And they forget that there's a level of accountability there that they may end up having.
Yep.
And you can get in trouble with trust administration even if you end up being the sole remaining beneficiary, right? Again, there's still standards and something may be subject to review either for tax purposes or whatever. And it's like, well, I was just
Oh yeah.
dealing with myself. I don't care if I made a mistake. That's not a good excuse, is it?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a lot less common when you have just one beneficiary because you have to have someone to be mad at you in order to kind of elevate things. But in terms of the taxes, you're right. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize that the tax side of things is it could be really difficult. And I mean, even in what I do, I like to say I know a little about a lot. And I know just enough to know that I have to find the right person for the different tax situations that I get into in this. So
Okay, so are there red flags where you would just automatically say you really should have someone helping you, or even more significant than that, take over the trust administration? You can see where the trouble is coming. I mean, obviously, clear evidence of a major family feud is going to be one of them. Are there others?
oh yeah.
Uh, That's the key for me, especially, when we're doing the planning. If there is any bad blood among the kids, which is very common, that is definitely the number one time that we do suggest bringing some kind of professional trustee in and not appointing one of the kids to do it. Because we do the litigation, we see the litigation. A lot of the time, the litigation is just purely out of hatred of each other. There may not even be anything that was done wrong, but they're going to try and find something and continue the litigation just to spite the other person. So common is very much even just any tension among the kids, because there's a lot of parents who will recognize that their kids don't exactly get along extremely well, but they'll still be like, say, oh, I think they'll be fine, they can get through this. And money changes people. They're fine when they get together in holidays when the parents are still there because they have to for the parents. But as soon as the parents are gone, they're kind of that glue holding the family together is gone. And, and then that's just unfortunately where things fall apart. Another situation we see a lot is where people actually don't have family members around or don't have family members local.
Yes.
So that's a lot of the time too, that if there ever is a time that people are living a lot longer these days, so they eventually usually will need some kind of care and some kind of oversight that can be a more interactive job. And if they don't have people who are close to them, I'm seeing that situation a lot here around them, then that's a lot of times where we bring in a professional.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems to me that you have to anticipate, foresee, whatever the right word might be for this, but you have to be at least become accustomed to dealing with a lot of sadness. And some of that will come from anger, some of that comes from misunderstanding, some comes from sheer ignorance. I don't know what this is all about, kind of thing. And then it gets pretty funky on the sad side pretty
Yep.
fast.
Yep. And one of the things you have to remember too is, I have kids. They're perfect in my eyes, right? They could do no wrong. And a lot of people see their kids kind of that same way when it comes to, well, especially when they're talking of their own death, because it's a difficult situation. It's a difficult topic for people to talk about. And people always have this mindset of, maybe my kids don't get along the best, or, maybe this, but if something happens to me, they can work through their differences to come together and just make sure that my wishes are taken care of. People see it in a totally different light, whereas as from experience, the opposite is usually what happens, when there's money involved. And now, mom or dad's gone, maybe both, the kids just go at each other's throats because they always know best. And like Genene was saying, most of the time it's just for hostility for each other. It's not even about what they're getting. It's just hostility.
And there's not much you can do about that other than to try and put a mediator hat on and
Yep.
tamp it down, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can't really take sides.
Yep.
You just got to go by whatever's in the trust document, right?
Yeah. And a lot of
Yeah.
people don't understand that as well, that what is going on in this administration is completely what their parents wanted. They always talk about, oh, they would have wanted this, they would have wanted that. It's like, it's right there in the trust document. And that's exactly what we're going to follow. So if you want to get mad at anyone, the only person you can really get mad at is the person who made the document. So
Who isn't around anymore to fight with.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite cartoons from the Far Side, Gary Larson, shows a woman on a porch, and coming out the window is a piano and a sofa and a chair and a desk and a lamp, and it's all going up in the clouds. And she's shouting to her neighbor, "It's Henry, he's taking it all with him."
Yeah.
We
It
don't
is
have the
true.
luxury of that. So I come back to you, Genene. How do you get people to the table to understand the importance of estate planning so it's not left to those left behind to sort out what in the world do we do with all this stuff, and especially when the family is close and it's a time of real grieving for everyone. It's like, this seems to be the last thing you'd want anybody to have to deal with.
I think the simplest solution and the simplest reason is purely the cost, right? There's a many different reasons that people should plan ahead and make things easier for their family, but the main thing is the cost and time of court. So if we have real estate, for example, I always try to focus on the real estate because it's the easiest. If you have a property that's worth $800,000, no matter what the mortgage is on that property, so you could have a mortgage at $600,000. The probate fees are going to be based on the gross value of the property, just like real estate commissions, right? We pay real estate commissions based on the sale value, not the net proceeds. That's exactly how probate is. So if we have a house worth $800,000, for that to go through the probate court process is going to cost about $25,000. And that is set by statute. That is not me quoting my prices. It's not another attorney quoting their prices. That is literally in the law that says this is what goes to the administrator, this is what goes to the attorney, and then there's some court costs as well. So it's about $25,000 for a real estate worth $800,000 to go through the probate court process. And the probate court process takes at least a year to get through. So that means that your assets are not effectively passing to even your children in a happy family and a nuclear family for at least a year, and also it's coming with that price tag. Whereas if we have a trust, if we simply set up a trust, put the assets into that trust, then there's no probate process whatsoever. You get to say exactly what you want to your assets in as much detail as you want, and you get to completely bypass the probate court process. So paying for an estate plan during your lifetime and doing that little bit of work is a fraction of the cost of going through the probate court process when you pass.
And I would imagine the same thing holds true for, professional administration with a fiduciary. You're paying fees, but compared to the potential harm you can do to your estate, the trust assets, or yourself by screwing up, it seems like this is not much different than, you pay a premium to have auto insurance and commercial liability insurance and homeowners insurance because your exposure to risk is high, and you don't want to pay that out of pocket if that risk event occurs, right?
Yep.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
we
this,
bring in fiduciaries a lot when things go wrong, so, and even with that, I had one case recently actually in San Bernardino where there was the trustee taking a ton of money. And so, we said for now, litigation, removing this person and proving that they've taken this money is a very long process. That's a years
Oh yeah.
long process to go through the discovery and be able to prove to the court what's been taken by the trustee who was a family member. So what we do in those cases a lot of the time is we ask for the court for immediate relief of putting a fiduciary, a third party in place to be in charge of the trust while we continue to fight over things between the family members. And that is going to save everybody a ton of money when we know somebody's already mishandling things or there's already problems in the family and we're going to be fighting over things. Let's at least put somebody in there who can preserve it. Or even if mom and dad are still alive, get somebody in there who can preserve things, kind of stop the bleeding. We get a lot of stop the bleeding cases.
okay, and so this can actually be something that needs a professional for trust administration before the trustor or trustors die, because they've reached the point where they're not competently handling their own assets.
Hmm.
And that's usually something that one or more family members will see and flag and say, can we help you?
Yep.
Right?
That actually, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something that a lot of people who, when they're going through the estate planning process, they actually don't think about. Because, everybody hears, oh, you need a trust, you need to avoid probate, you need to do all these things. But a lot of people think about it in death. A lot of people don't even consider in life. Because one of the big things is when you do your estate planning documents, it can be the most elaborate estate plan ever.
Sorry.
Usually the attorney will, move things at least on the real estate side of things. They can retitle the deed. They can take care of that side of things. But it's somebody's own personal responsibility to retitle their other assets, their bank accounts, all of these different things into the name of the trust. And one of the things people say, oh, well, I they don't ever put any urgency to that. I mean, some people do, but it's very rare. And what people don't realize is that what happens when you have your perfect estate plan done, you have your successor trustee, maybe you even decided, I need to have a professional fiduciary in here because, I know when I die, my kids aren't going to be able to handle this. What happens when you don't die? What happens when you become incapacitated and you have a trustee who's set to now step in and make these decisions, handle your trust, and none of your assets are in the name of the trust. So now you have all of these different assets that are supposed to be handled by a trustee, and they can't handle it. And
That's a
that's one of the
mess.
things. Yes,
Right.
yes.
So Genene, trying to head that stuff off at the pass, how do you invite a conversation with the parents? How do the kids invite a conversation with the parents to share with them what their economic situation is, whether they even have a trust and will or not, are they willing to share? Have that conversation so that everything is made aware to everyone and is smooth and easy for managing assets while still alive, transitioning out in a management role if they can no longer do it themselves, and then to make it easy for the successor trustee to deal with after passing. I mean, how do you, because some families say just don't talk about this stuff. How do you
Yep.
get that conversation going without starting a problem around the kitchen table?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it is a difficult one, right? Because it's very personality driven too. We get some people who are very private and they've never spoken with anybody about that. So you do have to navigate that everybody has a right to that privacy. We do, when we do an estate plan, we do have a binder with all of that information in there, and we highly recommend that they also include all of their asset information in that binder because there may be stuff that is in the trust, is not in the trust, and that can be different as well. So we definitely recommend always that they at least tell their kids or whoever's in there that they have documents, where they can find them, and then keep all of the information financially in that binder. But we do encourage it, especially as people begin to age, to have a little bit more of those conversations, because we do have a lot where we have aging parents and the kids are having to step into these roles. And the kids have no concept of how much money they have. What we see a lot is kids think their parents have millions of dollars and then they don't.
Yep.
And then that causes a ton of tension in the family, because we may have one kid who wants the superb care for mom and dad, everybody does, but then we have the other kid that's going, well, their money's going to run out in 2 years if we maintain what we're doing the way we're doing it now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's again where a fiduciary can be key in that kind of situation too, of kind of being able to take a step back and look at, yes, we want what's best, but what is best for the budget that we have. And a fiduciary is going to be better at that than the kids who are in it and wanting to kind of, going through this new phase of life that is extremely difficult.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's hard to predict. I mean, we're living longer and longer, which is a good thing, but it makes it harder and harder to make those assets stretch to take care of the growing medical and care needs that come if you manage to get up there in years. So striking the balance is part of the planning, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that's as much an art as a science or a guess, rather than
it is
a set of calculations.
That's actually one of the first things that we do as well when we have a case where it's questionable how much we're going to have in terms of assets, and especially when there's greater care needs. We'll actually do what's called a depletion analysis, which takes into consideration all different factors, how much they're currently spending every month, how much their current medical care is, if there's room and board housing, depending on what they're doing. And it takes all of that plus their income and figures out that if we're going at this rate, this money will stretch this long, depending on growth in the market and everything like that as well. But that's one of the first things that we do, because our biggest thing is we hate to leave someone high and dry in the end. You do this for 15 years and then, oh, you're out of money. Sorry about it. Good luck. So that's one of the first things that we do, because we want to make sure that we can help in any way possible, and stretch it as long as we can before we move into, of course, benefits.
It's got to be tough if let's say one spouse, the family history is living a long time and you're perfect health, and in the other side of the family, there's been, the types of things that have taken them out early, not necessarily things like smoking, you can point to that, or drinking, but genetic, disposition to things that might take you sooner rather than later. It's like, well, how do you balance those two things off? That would be tough, I would think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's tough.
Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground, and it's amazing how the time just flies. And you can see that there's a lot to this, ladies and gentlemen. You have to get down in the weeds, and you have to be willing to talk about stuff that's tough. And the best way to do that is with someone who knows what the lay of the land is, who knows how to see through or cut through the weeds and get you to see clearly and not get burrs in your socks while doing it. I think I've run that analogy about as far as I should. Okay, we'll leave that alone. I want to thank Jacob Averett and Genene Dunn for being my guests today. They are really knowledgeable about our subject matter for today. So if you need the help, there's a couple of folks that you should reach out to. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. This will conclude our episode of Professionals of the Inland Empire. So long for now.
Thanks for watching or listening to, depending on the case, the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John W. Tulac. If you have a suggestion for a guest, email him at jwtulac, that's JWTULAC, @gmail.com. jwtulac @gmail.com.